thing. I've had people, ever since I was working, when I was working at the dealership, I would have people that would come and they would talk to me about, well, are y'all gonna hook the machine up to this car, you know, and figure out, and they had an idea that whatever machine we hooked up was gonna tell us exactly what bolt was loose and why they weren't getting 20 miles to the gallon instead of 19. At the Volkswagen dealership, when I was working there in the early 80s, they actually had a test port on the, under the engine compartment on those bugs, where you would hook up this machine and it would basically ask you yes or no questions, and you would get all the way to the bottom of your little routine, and it didn't tell you much of anything that you couldn't have already figured out about yourself. Furthermore, there was another machine that we had, the MS-1700. Some people that have ever worked anywhere around anything that was AMC or Renault in the 80s or that vintage, probably sell this thing that you plugged in under to these two connectors under the hood, and it would basically walk you through all these little tests, and it had one little screen with blue words going across it, and it would tell you yes or no. It's kind of like that, and check this, do that, and you had to kind of know how to go through the procedure. And if you were checking for one that wouldn't start, and it couldn't figure out why it wouldn't start, it would have this message that would pop up that would say, engine failed to start because of fuel, mechanical, or ignition problems, which is useless. I mean, you know, you're expecting the machine to help you. And even on a scan tool today, if I get a scan tool and I see high fuel trims and I see lean codes, what do I know? Is the scan tool telling me exactly where to go to fix this problem? How many times have an oxygen sensor been thrown on one that wasn't what was wrong with it because it was given some kind of a code for, you know, a lean code? Well, this particular one here is a sort of a little story about a couple of them. You see this 98 Dodge Stratus, had about 88,000 miles on it at the time, 2.4 liter engine, had that 4.1T transaxle, and the first complaint that it came about with was that it had a rear main engine oil seal leak. They had gone to a shop in another city a couple hours away from here, and the shop told them that the rear main oil seal was leaking. They went there for an oil leak problem, and so what they did was they were told that the car had whacked out their machine because it had too much oil in it or something. I don't know what that meant, but they were going to charge her $1,000, $1,200 or something like that to put a rear main engine oil seal in it. And the girl's dad worked here, and he said, just bring the car up here and we'll have them look at it. And so basically what we did, when we got it up here, we put dye in it. You've done that, haven't you? Put dye in there, you crank it up, see where it's coming from. And what we came up with, well, this right here, by the way, I put this slide in between. The DPFE sensors on Ford vehicles are prone to fail. If you look at that, you see that on the machine, you kind of know that's what's going on as soon as you see it, if you're familiar with those vehicles. That was basically a little point I was making. This is an oil leak we found. The repair shop claimed it was coming from the rear main engine oil seal because that's the area it was dripping from, but if you look at where the dye is, it was coming from right there at the back corner of that cylinder head. What you're seeing there, that's got that drop of oil hanging off of the cylinder head gasket. Now, engines with overhead cam shafts in them, not this one, this has got the camshaft in the block, but if it's got camshafts in the head, it's got to have a pressurized oil feed to those camshafts in order to keep them lubricated. The cool thing about the one you guys are working on is the camshafts in the block. The pickup that I drive, is that 07 F-150's got the 4.2 in it, the camshafts in the block. Because I don't have to fool with overhead cams. I mean, I'm not saying they're a bad thing, I'm just saying personally, if I can, I'm going to drive something that doesn't have overhead cams. Sooner or later you'll have issues. Anyway, this one had a leak. The camshaft in this one was spun by a belt. A little 2.4 liter and all that. And so basically what we had to do is we had to pull the head off. This is where that oil goes up through there, and it'll have an O-ring around there that's supposed to contain that oil pressure. And on this particular one, that head gasket failed. So in order to pull the head off, you've obviously got to take the timing belt off and all this. So we went ahead and put a timing belt back on it. And so the guy took off, and after we got it, it ran really, really good. It didn't have any oil leaks. And we drove it around. He drove it around here. Everything was fine. He heads back over there to Enterprise. And he got just about over there, and then whenever he was coming back, he drove it back the next day, and he said it's running not so good now. The check engine light is on, and we've basically got some kind of an issue here. So when he brought it back in here, sure enough, it was running rich. The map sensor was reading low vacuum, Okay, what's gonna cause low vacuum? Give me something that's gonna cause low vacuum. Remember we talked last semester about that? There's 3 things that usually cause low vacuum. One of them would be,
Air leak.
huh?
Air leak.
Well, if it's a big enough air leak, that's not a bad answer. What about EGR flowing? Will cause low vacuum, low engine vacuum, right?
And if the EGR was stopped up, it could blow that seal out.
Well, the EGR won't have anything to do with oil pressure. But the simple fact was, if you got EGR, it was fine when it left. The vacuum was normal. Fuel trims were right where they were supposed to be. In this particular case, we had issues because we were trying to figure out what changed between the time when it left running right and the time when it came back running wrong. That's what we're trying to figure out. So if we're looking at low engine vacuum, you're basically looking at late ignition timing, which you can't adjust it on this car. You're looking at EGR flow, which we didn't have on this car, and you're also looking at late cam timing. Cam timing late. If the cam shafts are running behind, you're going to have issues with that. So what we found was these timing marks that you see right here with the yellow circles around them are supposed to be directly opposite one another. Now you remember whenever you're wanting to see if an engine's in time or not, what I'm going to do is turn it through until the cam timing marks are lined up, and then I'm going to look at the crank mark. And if you look at the crank mark, the cam may be 180 out. But on this particular one, when we turned it around so that this mark was lined up, that one had moved. But the timing belt was still nice and snug. Now, if you tighten the timing belt up too much, who remembers what happens if the timing belt's too tight? Huh? It makes noise, too. I mean, but when you get it, did you do that?
Yeah.
Remember that? You got it a little too tight. You remember, what did you hear?
Really loud.
It would make a noise kind of like that. If a timing belt's too tight, I don't even know why it makes that noise. But if it's making a racket, it sounds like a sort of a whining or a whistling racket. Then you go back in there and you slack your timing belt off a little bit, and that noise goes away, which is what happened whenever you did that, right? So he was going to make sure it was good and tight, But it's not like an alternator belt. There's supposed to be a little bit of slack there, but not a whole lot. All right. What I would contend that happened here, we also put a water pump on this while we had it down, is that somebody was scraping gaskets, and when we put the timing belt back on, there was a piece of something that got down there and was laying on the timing belt, and when the engine, it must have fell in there after he drove off, and it rode that timing belt down there and caused it to jump a couple of teeth on the crank or something. Something got between the timing belt and one of the cogs, possibly that one right there, and it made it do this. So we basically had, all right, now think about this. We've got 2 cam shafts here. One's the intake cam and one's the exhaust cam, I guess, right? You think? Or side by side, it's dual overhead cam. All right, so if that cam shaft right there, if the mark is up there, and I don't even think we looked at the crank mark, but this one right here is it running ahead of that other one or behind it? If it's turning this way. Yeah, it's basically running ahead of us. So that one's running behind that one. So imagine if we had turned that crank down here and looked, we'd find out that the crank was in time with that one, but this one here was out of time with the crank and that other cam. Probably because whatever it was rode the belt up. Here's the deal. When you're doing a timing belt, make sure there's not trash in there, in that plastic cover, that can get down in there and get between the belt cog and make it go and jump 2 or 3.
And it messes valves up.
No, that one won't do that. 2.4 Chrysler won't bend the valves. And I've seen them jump again and again. It is a good deal that you're saying there. The ones that you want to make sure that you do before they get in the valves is Mitsubishis and Kias. They'll eat the valves for lunch. The Kia snaps the heads off the valves and beats the crap out of everything and just ruins the engine. If you let a Kia, like a little Kia Cephia or something, if it jumps time, it just makes total destruction, and mayhem with that. All right. Now, getting back to the machine, this friend of mine that was working over at the Ford place at the time, we also had the Jeep franchise over there. I stopped by one day after I came to work here to go see him, and he says, I've got fuel trim numbers that he was looking at his scan tool now. He had the Ultimate machine on it. He took his fuel trim numbers, were reading positive, like 26. which means it's adding to correct for a lean condition, right? Is that right? I mean, that sounds right, doesn't it? It's adding fuel to correct for lean condition. Okay, so to him, a perceived lean condition, which is what he saw at his oxygen sensors were pretty much, you know, down in the lower, in the netherland, you know, below the half volt thing. And he says, this is, you know, something that I'm going to put an oxygen sensor on here, maybe a couple of them. I don't remember if he put one or two. But after we fired it up, he cleared the codes. Here's another thing. Remember this. If you've got fuel trims that are reacting, you know, to a perceived lean condition, and you're going to fix something that you found wrong, replacing oxygen sensors that you think may be bad, or fixing an air leak as a manifold, like a split hose, or maybe putting a manifold gasket, always take your battery cable off or disconnect your engine controller so it will forget all of those skewed numbers, so the fuel trims will reset back to 0. Then you start it up after your repair and watch what happens when it closes loop. If the short fuel trim starts walking again, you haven't fixed it. You ain't done. You're gonna have to go back, figure out what happened. All right, so what we did this time was he had this Jeep. It was like a 2000 Jeep Cherokee, and he put the oxygen sensors on it, and I settled into the passenger seat with him just so we could ride it and verify the fix. And he hooked his battery back up, we fired it up, it went into closed loop, and the numbers went right back where they were. And so I said, you still got way skewed numbers on here. Well, he says, I know it doesn't have any air leaks. I've already done that. I guess he smoke tested it and everything. I've got no air leaks. I've got no oxygen sensor issues, obviously, because my leads are, you know, oxygen sensor wires aren't shorted to ground or anything like that. The heaters in both the sensors are working. I don't have any codes for that anyway. All I've got is codes telling me, you know, pointing me in this direction. And, so I said, well, what about your barometric pressure reading? All right, the barometric pressure reading on that G comes from right here. All right, what is that? This sensor right here, what is it?
And then throttle position sensor.
No, the throttle position sensor is somewhere else. It's on the opposite side of this
Mass
shaft.
airflow sensor.
It doesn't have a mass airflow. Chrysler have stayed away from that pretty much. It had MAP. A MAP sensor, when you turn on the key, reads barometric pressure, and the engine controller takes that barometric pressure, plugs it into its programming block, and it decides what to do with the fuel mix. All right. As we looked at it, the barometric pressure, what's barometric pressure at sea level supposed to be? Your 1 bar, which is what? You know, it's like 30, you know, I mean, if you pull all of the vacuum out, I mean, pull all the air out of an AC system, it's 30 inches, right? But 1 bar is what he's on, 14.5 pounds per square inch is 1 bar, pretty much. But this one here was reading, instead of reading 30, which is, you know, the English equivalent of that, it was reading 24. Now, what's 24 telling it? I understand how this works, so there's a way to go. 24 is telling it it's at altitude. 24 is telling it it's in Denver. Telling it a lie. 24 is telling it, I've got thin air. Okay, so if it's got thin air, does it need as much gas? No, because it doesn't have as much air, it don't need as much gas, because the air pressure is thinner. So if it thinks it's at Denver, basically, it's not giving it as much gas. Now, what are the oxygen sensors seeing? They're seeing that it's running lean as all get out, right? And the PCM's getting this feedback from the out. The PCM has no clue whether this guy's telling the truth or not, because it's got nothing to compare it to, right? All it's got to give it barometric pressure is that. Because if it gets barometric pressure from that that's not right, it's going to change the way things, or it tilts everything out of balance. So the oxygen sensor is saying, I don't have enough fuel. I'm seeing a lot of oxygen. And the engine controller says, okay, fine, I'll give you some more fuel. So it gives it some more fuel to get this back like it's supposed to be. And the reason it did that was because the pulse width was modified based on barometric pressure that was lower than was real. You see how this big circle works together? If you understand that, it's not too hard to fix one if you know which numbers you're looking at. Now, if you didn't know that 24 was not normal, you still wouldn't know anything, even if you saw the number, right? That's why you need to know, if you plug a lot of cars in, you're going to see a lot of numbers, and you're going to understand what they're ordinarily supposed to be. That's one thing of smacking us around on a Chevrolet, because because everything pretty much looked like it was supposed to, but the volumetric efficiency was off. You know?
So if you would've took that G to Denver, it would've run right?
Well, it would have probably been still off because it wasn't telling the truth about sea level. It would have lied about Denver too and told it was even farther out.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
But like if it was in Denver's, like air or whatever, it would run right.
Yeah, well, not with that sensor on it. But if that reading is what you'd get if you were in Denver. But see, that sensor is basically, when you first turn on the key, that manifold has got atmospheric pressure in it, and that's what it looks at. And it wants to know how much atmospheric pressure it is. You remember, PSIG is a pressure measurement that considers level pressure, sea level pressure is 0, and sea level pressure rounds to 14.7. PSIA is a measurement of pressure test that begins at perfect vacuum. So we're basically starting at sea level pressure, which is the PSIG thing. What you're talking about is, if you're in Denver with a good map sensor, you're going to be reading about the same thing this map sensor was reading, more or less. It was reading a higher altitude. But because this one wasn't telling the truth, if you went to Denver when it was supposed to be reading 24, it'd probably be reading 18 because it was a bad sensor. We replaced this. After we replaced that and cleared our codes, our adaptive tables again, everything leveled out, fuel trims did what they were supposed to, and we were in good shape. You got it? So that's another thing where the machine is giving us information, but we have to interpret it properly so that we'll know what we're doing. Now this right here is Wiregrass Oil Company, and if somebody give me an approximate time frame here.
Oh,
30 something.
Huh?
30 something.
And she knows that because, what you looking at?
That car.
There you go, see that? Look how observant she is. She noticed an old car sitting over there, and it's one somebody just pulled up on and got out of. And the guy that owned the place, he was wearing a tie. See anybody wearing a tie right now? He had a shop rag hanging out of his pocket too. And that's what it looked like to have Kelly Springfield tires. And then look at old gas pumps. See how they work? Anybody know how those gas pumps work? You ever seen one of them work?
Pump the fuel up in when they measure it out by glass.
Yeah, it actually goes down. It's numbered upside down. The zero's at the top. And whenever it drains out, that's how much you got. That's a hamburger from Doc's. Everybody like that? I do.
What's that bad?
Yeah. Huh?
How's that relevant?
Huh? Don't you love that?
How's that relevant?
He's making me hungry.
I put it up there so somebody would say, how is that relevant?
Huh.
It makes me hungry.
I always kind of keep you guys tripped up. If I don't do that, you're going to be really confused all the time. All right. Now, I achieved my objective. Somebody said, how is that relevant? I got what I wanted. And incidentally, I don't even know how much it cost her. I'd give you $1 for it. All right. Now let's talk about these questions here before we leave, because we got a little time here. That was about a little 30-minute thing. I'm going to erase what I drew up here yesterday because I'm tired of looking at it. It's been up here all day. All right. Now let's talk about these questions right quick because we got about enough time to whip through this test, and that'll keep you guys from failing it. I want somebody to help me with these questions. There is not anything you can look at. You're checking a late 80s high mileage Honda Accord for a blue smoke at idle problem. The car runs fine otherwise. A compression test reveals compression that's considerably higher than normal. As you consider the evidence, which of the choices below would make sense? A, advanced ignition timing. B, worn piston ring. C, advanced valve timing. D, none of the above.
Worn piston rings?
Well, we got high compression now. You got to remember that.
It could be advanced ignition time.
I think it's C.
Advanced valve timing. The valve timing is slightly advanced. If it's advanced, even a tooth on those things, what happens is, the valves close before they're supposed to when the pistons, if the piston's going down like that, what my dad was talking about, you see that on diesels. If it was out of time, it can actually pull oil up in there some kind of a way. Anyway, I've seen that here. One that was blowing blue smoke and had higher than normal compression because it was a tooth out of time. And that's why I put that question in there. That was on an 87 model Honda Accord. This Honda came driving in hot, and your technician checked the compression immediately. Now he comes to you with a complaint that his compression gauge is stuck in one of the spark plug holes. It won't screw back out, and he doesn't know what to do about it. His hose won't disconnect from the adapter, so he can't use a socket. What does he got to do?
Crank the car back up, get it on.
Smart man, crank it up, let it get hot, See this one right here, all of these are totally, well, number B is the one you're gonna do, yeah. So you're gonna let it get warm again so you'll loosen back up. A new technician just removed the transmission and replaced a one-piece rear main engine oil seal. You saw the seal after he installed it, and it looked just fine. Now the leak from the flywheel housing is twice as bad as it was before. What might be the problem? I've seen this here too. The garter spring popped out of the seal while he was putting it in. You know what the garter spring is, right? I think Joey and Emerald were looking at the air conditioners, what it is. That's what you're hearing in there.
While they're changing filters.
Huh?
They're changing filters.
Yeah, that sounds right. All right. Okay, so you're working on a 99 Jeep Cherokee. Now listen particularly to this one because you may hear this again somewhere. You're working on a 99 Jeep Cherokee for a power door lock problem. The doors will unlock just fine, but they won't lock with either door switch. They also lock and unlock with a remote fob. What's the most likely cause of the problem?
Is it
Huh?
A? Is it
I didn't understand what you said.
A? Is it A?
No?
The actuators.
Well, no, because they'll work either way. I'm gonna tell you what it was, and this was my Jeep that did this. It was a bad passenger door module. And the passenger door module is the computer that operates everything. And neither one of those switches, it would not recognize an unlock command, I mean a lock command from either switch. You receive a Keon engine running code 41, which is a lean exhaust, on a 1987 Ford Ranger. You put the breakout box on it, connect to the O2 voltage signal from the sensor, and find 2.38 volts. Now what are we expecting at an oxygen sensor on an older one like that? How many volts usually? Remember yesterday when we were talking about oxygen sensors, 0 to 1? We're getting 2.38. Why are we getting so much? Checking continuity from the PCM to the sensor. You got good continuity and no shorts to power. The signal wire connector pins are all tight. What's the most likely cause of this problem? Ding, ding.
Okay.
Huh? Who said what? What? You said C? Is that what you said? She's right. A loose O2 sensor ground caused that voltage to float up. Here's a good one. An 84 Mazda RX-7 has been in your shop 6 times for bad rear axle bearings in the last 6 months. On the last visit, you replaced the entire rear axle assembly with a new unit. Now both bearings have failed again. What's the most likely cause of the recurring failure? A bent vehicle frame. B, a warped drive shaft. C, a disconnected battery to engine ground. Or D, the customer is driving the car too hard.
That vehicle frame.
Warp drive shaft.
I say B.
It's actually a disconnected battery to engine ground. And the reason that is happening is because whenever you go to start it, the ground is running down the frame through the park brake cables into the rear end, and it's arcing on the bearings, and then it comes back up the drive shaft, and then the starter spins and it starts the engine. Well, this happens in the blink of an eye. And when you take the bearings out, they've rolled around so much on these arc points that you don't even see accurately what happened to them. But that is something I knew of happening, was a loose battery to engine ground was causing those axle bearings to fail. Sounds preposterous, but you got to be smarter than the average bear to do this kind of work. And a lot of people, I heard this guy one time way out in Arizona, there was a school out there, and he was talking to a bunch of mechanics. And he says, just about any one of you guys with a minimal amount of training could go from being a mechanic to being a plumber. Now, I don't have anything against plumbers. I hire them all the time. But he says, but if a plumber wanted to become a mechanic, he would have to have a lot more training before he could change careers. See what I mean? Because you got to know a heck of a lot to do the kind of work that we're learning to do here. A 1990 Chevy pickup with a 5.7 engines throwing rich running diagnostic trouble codes and blowing black smoke out the exhaust. Engine vacuum is 13 inches at idle. The engine runs slightly better at higher RPM, and you suspect retarded ignition timing, but it checks okay. What's the least likely cause? What do you think? Could it be a loose harmonic balancer and a sheared crankshaft keyway? If the crankshaft keyway shears, it's basically going to shear where it goes through the timing gear on the crank, and that's going to cause the crank to get ahead of the camshaft. Going to get ahead of the gear, which is still chained to the cam gear, and that's gonna make it run rich, because of, you got a map sensor that's reading low engine vacuum. All right, a stretch timing chain could do it. Heavy EGR flow at idle could do it. But a blown upper intake gasket, while it is a mild possibility, is the least likely cause. All right, let's come in here. 1996 Ford Windstar comes into your shop with a P0304 diagnostic trouble code and a misfire that only occurs when the engine is off idle. If you hold the throttle to keep the misfire steady while checking with your stethoscope, you find the number 4 injector stops clicking. Switching off the vehicle and restarting it, you find the injector starts working again. The injector feed and signal wires check out fine all the way to the PCM. What's the most likely cause? A bad PCM driver that stops firing the injector when it heats up. Clogged EGR ports except the one feeding number 4. A bad injector that drops out when it reaches a certain temperature. Or trash in the fuel rail that moves away from the injector when the engine dies.
Power trash and fuel oil.
Clogged EGR ports except the one feeding number 4. I've seen that. Interesting deal. Whenever each one of those little each runner's got a little port in it that's about 6 millimeters in diameter that feeds EGR in there, and when they all clog up with crud except for one of them, that one's going to misfire when EGR starts flowing, because it's not a balanced feed, and too much of it's going in there and it'll kill that cylinder. 1996 Mazda 626 with a 2-liter engine comes in on the hook from a used car lot. It spins like it has no compression at all. Technician A says the timing belt's probably at fault. Technician B says the idle air control may have stuck and caused the cylinders to wash down with gasoline. What should be done first? A, the car should be pushed into the shop and the timing belt checked. B, a shot of engine oil should be added to each cylinder first to check for the washdown. C, the ignition system should be checked. Or D, the idle air control system should be removed and checked.
C. C.
B?
C.
I think it's big.
B is actually what you ought to do, because when a used car lot cranks them up and moves them from one place to the other, doesn't ever let them warm up, they actually will foul the plugs, and then when they keep trying to start them, they keep squirting gas in there, and it washes cylinder walls down, and those low tension piston rings, it spins like it ain't got no compression, and it really doesn't have. Put the oil in there, gets compression, it'll fire up usually. I've seen them do that. Walked out there, heard them going, yeah, they didn't have no compression at all, because they were washed down. The older ones with the high tension piston rings, whenever they got washed down, they would turn slower. You heard them go, rah, 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 and it's really, really hard for them to spin. Finally, a 94 Cutlass with a 3100 engine has no injector pulse. The scan tool indicates the PCM is receiving an RPM signal. Technician A, following a no-start pinpoint test, finds a good signal from the crank sensor and condemns the ignition module. Technician B says the problem is probably not the ignition module. Who is correct? I've seen that too. Every one of these things that I showed you here, I saw in the field. Every single one of them. What the deal was on this one here was the relay that powers up the injectors was bad, and the injectors weren't powered up. That's why it didn't have any injector pulse. You pull your Noid light, plug it in, you didn't see any injector pulse. Now, if you check them one at a time, you might see an injector pulse coming on that ground, but if you're checking it with a Noid light, which most people do, whenever they're checking that, they didn't see it. So this one guy that I was talking to was going to replace the ignition module, but I said, wait a minute, you had basically had an RPM signal to the PCM. Why would you not have injector pulse? What's the ignition module got to do with that? All right. Did everybody answer those questions?
What was 10D?
Which one?
10.
10? What do you think? That's going to be B, isn't it? He was going to, A, condemn the ignition module, which wasn't bad, and B said it was right. Now, did you look up, what about the yes or no question up at the very top of the test? You see that one with the little check boxes above it, next to it? Do you have a metric crescent wrench in your toolbox?
I don't have a toolbox of them.
There's not such thing as a metric crescent.
Seriously?
I mean, they're all the same, one.
What do you think?
You have to have a metric.
Huh?
Yeah, but a crescent wrench is adjustable. So why would you have a metric?
Good day, I never used one.
The one there is such a thing, believe it or not. Look on the side of the wrench. It'll tell you that it's an 8-inch crescent wrench, and it'll also say it's 200 millimeters.
So it's both.
Yeah, basically, you can say it's a metric crescent wrench, or you can say it's not. That's the sort of